Well, hi. I don't know that I'm going to do all that in a half hour, but I'll do my best. You know, it's a very interesting thing coming in and talking to people about forgiveness because, like, nobody wants to do it. And no, and I mean that. And I'm invited into places where people hate each other, and they say, "Come in and like help us heal," and nobody wants that. And even people who, like, I've given many talks in all sorts of meditation retreats, and people who have meditated for 30 years, and forgiveness is hard. And it's interesting because even people who are really interested in spiritual qualities struggle with forgiveness. And that's the reason why I became a forgiveness teacher, is my best friend in the world stopped being my friend. He fell off the side of a planet. And I was devastated. And I had no idea what to do at all, none whatsoever. And I was angry and hurt and scared and bitter and all the things that people do when they're hurt. And I don't know, what do you do? So I did what we all do, which I get nasty and pissy and started becoming bitter and unhappy. And one day, my wife looked at me and said, "Fred, I still love you, but I like you a lot less." And the humor is, I wasn't married long enough to disregard that. You know what I'm saying? It's like if you've been married a long time, they can say anything they want. It just goes right through the head and doesn't stick. But we hadn't been married that long, so it's really like, ouch. And she basically said, like, you need to become the person that I married again, because you're letting this like devastating wound take you away from yourself. And so because of that, like, I literally forced myself to figure out, well, how do you get over something like this, which is unmerited? And I didn't do anything that I knew. I still know that I didn't do anything, so to speak, even though we've talked it out. But what do you do when the world slams you and you can't figure out what you did? So I had to like look inside of me. Who knows what I found there, but I'm just, and I like reached in and said, there's got to be a better way. And literally after about 5 years of suffering, the only thing that worked was to say, it's not my problem. It hurts, but it's not my problem. I need to move on. Like, this piece of my life needs to be left here. And I need to move on and leave energetically that piece here. That piece has got to stay, but I've got to go forward. And that meant not talking about it so much, not being righteous about it. These are hard things. Like, it's one thing to say you've forgiven, but continue to remind people what a bad person that person was and how magnanimous you are. You have to let it go. So I had to teach myself to not say, you know, remember X the idiot? I'm no longer an idiot. That's not forgiveness. So I had to teach myself to not use it as an excuse, which is, my life isn't good because this happened. That's the biggest reason that people don't forgive, is because they don't want to let go of the excuse they have for not being successful, which is huge, right? I mean, like, why would I want to take responsibility for my life when I can say, well, because my mother didn't love me a certain way, it's not my problem. So literally, though, I mean, here I was in very uncharted territory. I mean, about as uncharted as can be, because nothing had ever hurt me that badly. And nowhere did I had to literally take off like a cloak that I had put on that was strangling me. And I didn't even know how much it was strangling me until somebody looked at me and said, "Fred, you're not okay. Like, I understand, but you're not okay." So what was so interesting is not any longer complaining about that person, was not any longer congratulating myself for not being that person. That's one of those you hear all the time. Well, they should have done it this way, and if I had been in that situation, I would have been Mahatma Gandhi, but they're like, this terrible human being, and none of that. And then there's no longer any blame for how they ruined your life, which is the hardest. It's your life. It's just your life. And we can use our mind and our words to make up all sorts of excuses why we're not successful. You can pick out anything. You can pick out, like some people do, well, the planets weren't in the right alignment for me. Jupiter was out of sync with Mars, therefore I haven't been successful. That may be true. It just doesn't matter. Just like you may not have been loved as a child, you may have married the worst partner in the history of human evolution. And that doesn't matter. There's a lot of competition for that one, though, because having talked to a lot of, in particular, women with like the worst ex-husbands ever on the planet, that has a big waiting list. I'm just letting you know. It's like when you show up in the airport and there's that list for all the people who won first-class seats. This is a much bigger list. Who had the worst ex? A lot of competition. It doesn't matter. We just have a life. We have a life. I mean, I happen to believe we have multiple lives, but for this one, we have one life. And we have lots of experiences. And we make of it what we can. We can use blame and a lack of responsibility anytime we wish. That's a freedom we have. But we won't grow in a certain way until we stop doing that. Until we say, this is it. I got this one. Some stuff was painful. Some stuff was wonderful. Some stuff was good. Some stuff stunk. But it's me. And what do I want to do with my life? Mary Oliver has that line, this one wild and precious life. What do I want to do with it? Well, most of us limit this wild and precious life because we don't let go of our painful stuff. Most of us. We don't bring energetically ourselves fully into the 21st century. We're, so to speak, not playing with a full deck. Because we hold energetics back in 1990 or 2000 or 1979 or who knows. But the brain, which does our processing, knows where all these energetics are stored. And it won't let us be fully in the present as long as there's an energetic from 1985 which we haven't healed from, which we haven't released and said, hey, no matter what it was, it was. And me, in 2015, my heart's big enough to hold 1985, including all of it. But it's only because my heart's big enough in 2015. It has nothing to do with 1985 at all. That's the key thing that I learned about forgiveness. It's not about the past in even one tiny little iota. Has nothing to do with the past. It's what kind of heart and mind do we have now? Is our heart and mind big enough and resilient enough and strong enough and compassionate enough and generous enough so that we can then re-language 1985 or 2005 right now? And it can happen in an instant. All you need is one full moment of love. And then you're free to re-examine anything. Anything. Like one moment of just your heart open, and then you grasp the fact that you have stuck yourself. That you have created a certain prison around this heart, and that you have to open the heart. When I've been teaching this for almost 20 years, and I remember when I first started the Stanford Forgiveness Project, I remember all these people coming in to talk. And I'm Jewish, kvetch was my word, you know. They would kvetch about their life. They had different words for it, but to me it was just kvetching. And they all had different flavors of kvetching, you know. But it was all kvetching or complaining, and it was all, they sounded so small. And the problems were so big, and the bad people were so big. And I thought to myself, these are people, and I didn't mean this disparagingly because I meant it as us, these are people who each has a Grinch heart. Their heart was 2 sizes too small. So when your heart is 2 sizes too small, you need the world to be perfect for you to keep your heart open, because your heart's so small. But as your heart gets bigger, the world doesn't have to be as perfect. And this is just the truth. I mean, not your physical heart, because if your physical heart too much bigger, you're dead. But I mean, your metaphysical heart, you know, it's like, you don't want a big heart. That's like not good. You know, it's heart failure or all sorts of other things. But what you want is a metaphysical heart that's big. And that metaphysical heart doesn't need to manipulate the world all day long to make it easy for that tiny little heart to be okay. So if you're loving, or generally more loving, you don't need your partner to always be perfect. But if you have very little bandwidth, then you are full of demands for your partner. A lot of that can be traced to childhood, but not all of it. If you've had a poor childhood, then you generally grow up with less bandwidth. You know, you have very limited emotional resonance. So you need everything to be exactly the way you need it for you to function okay. Well, if you can use spiritual practice and emotional techniques and growth and anything to open up your bandwidth, then you don't need to have the past be quite as ideal. Because you have stretch. You can stretch. Which says, okay, this person didn't behave well. Okay, that's just true. They didn't behave well. So what? Right? We'll all be dead. So this person didn't behave well. Fine. I'll put a little file in my computer that says this person didn't behave well. That's it. We don't have to construct so much drama around it. They just didn't behave well. What part of this earth doesn't have people not behaving well? It's everywhere. You need to feel the pain. This is one of the other key things I've learned. Forgiveness doesn't obliterate the need for grieving. You're going to hurt. And it can sometimes hurt like hell. But hurting and being like obsessed with it and using that wound as an excuse for not having a full life or holding somebody out as an enemy, those are not needed. But feeling the pain is absolutely needed. Absolutely needed. So one of the things that we teach throughout forgiveness is you have to hurt. There's no miracle excuse or shortcut through loss and pain. So when this friend abandoned me, which he did as not harshly, but as dismissively as somebody could do, that hurts. It hurts like hell. This was my closest friend in the world. So of course it hurt. But 2 years later, had I had the capacity to hold that hurt and just hurt, then I'm done. It hurts. And I'm on to the rest of life. But because I didn't have the capacity and I didn't know how to just hurt without making an enemy, I made kind of sticky that kept me like very narrow and stuck for years. I linked his bad behavior with my hurt, turned it into his moral lack, my superiority. I ignored the fact that billions of people suffer every day on the planet, so I made it into like a unique drama of some kind that like should have been on the nightly news. And I turned it into this major drama, which it wasn't. It was just somebody behaved badly. I was unprepared for how badly they behaved. I didn't have the inner resources to cope with it, and I didn't have the intelligence to find those inner resources so I could heal. That's what happened. But we don't have enough emotional maturity, and so we don't say the right things to ourselves. We don't, first of all, allow ourselves to suffer the wounds that we have to suffer. You know, you look at the amount of alcohol consumed and coffee and all of the distraction we use with our phones, you know, all the 24/7 of this. We don't want to feel. You have to feel. Otherwise, it's not going to come through your body and come out of your body. You need to feel it. And some things are very painful. Loss, dishonesty, thievery, they all hurt. But if you can hold the hurt, then it'll pass. Because that's what we're designed to do. But we use our mind's phenomenal ability to talk about things and create drama around it. We use our mind's capacity in a way that makes it a prison, not just a transitory experience that will pass. Yes, this person behaved very badly. It hurts like hell. And it will be over because other people will treat me well. Other people, in fact, one of the exercises that I do now in forgiveness classes, which really annoys people, I'm just letting you know, this is annoying to people, is they're so busy wanting to tell me about how people have disappointed them. So one of the practices I do as part of the training is I want you to turn to somebody near you and I want you to discuss somebody who was much nicer to you than you were to them. Like flipping it around. Like I want you to have a long, like 10-minute conversation of a human being who was much nicer to you than you were to them. Let's develop a little humility. And let's realize that this hurt goes in all directions. You know, we hurt each other. The other thing I do is I have them tell a life story around the blessings in their life, not just the obstacles and the difficulties. So I want you to find a partner and tell like a life story, and I'm not telling you to do this, about what are the blessings, the unanticipated goodnesses that came to you that you couldn't possibly have thought would happen. Why don't we talk about that? Why don't we create a story not just around who's been unkind, who's screwed you over, where you've been disappointed, but where the world has given you more than you ever could have imagined. Well, that's how you keep yourself in balance, so things pass. They do, they pass. It hurts now. Well, this friend and I have become best friends again. Yeah, wasn't that hard, actually. We now meet regularly. This is not even a speed bump in my life, except for the fact that it launched me into being an international teacher of forgiveness. But I don't even have that in reaction to him. In fact, it doesn't even come up when I think about him, except when I'm talking, because I'm talking as a teacher. But for me personally, it's irrelevant. It's so much digested. It's just digested. It's digested in the way that your third grade birthday party was digested. A wonderful thing happened. People came around you. They told you they loved you. They gave you presents. They blew little things. And then it's over. And you fully digested that and moved on. Well, I fully digested the fact that this person did this, and I moved on. You have to recognize that you move on from almost everything, as you should. But when we don't, it becomes very problematic because, one, it starts to seep into our schemas of who we are. You know, it starts to seep into, this is who I think I am. I'm Fred, who was mistreated by this person. If I bring that as a schema, then the next person who mistreats me, that schema gets deeper, which is not only was I mistreated by this person, but that person. And now there's two. And then if somebody else does anything else, we got a list. The poor me list, the life isn't fair list, the you won't believe how crappy my life is list. We all have that list. You're supposed to have that list because you need a place in your brain for negative experiences to reside so that you can access it when you're in pain and trouble, so you look at the things that might have helped you in the past. So you're going to have like a list, you know, like you're going to have that. The thing is, you want a limited number of links to it in your memory stores. You want as few verbal categories of it. So when you don't forgive and you hold on to it as a story, then everyone you meet knows that you're the one who had a terrible ex. Or you're the one whose ex doesn't pay child support. Or you're the one whose ex, you know, doesn't treat your kid right. Or you're the one whose parents were alcoholics, whatever it is. Everybody knows that. But what you don't realize is the tentacles in your brain, the way our associative memories are making links all over the place. You think you've got it confined to just dad was a drunk, and dad may have been a drunk. But if you haven't digested that and let dad be a drunk without it having anything to do with you at all, then you have all these things that when things pop into your brain, you're triggering your stress response because you're still afraid of that drunk if you haven't fully digested it. You may only know it as a tightness in your stomach or a flutter in your heart or a tightness in your arm or nasty words that come out of your mouth, but it's there. What you want is never to deny the fact that dad was a drunk and you grew up in an unsafe home. That's all true. But it doesn't have to have anything to do with now. That's just your story. We all have a story. So part of forgiveness is teaching us not to be so detached to the difficult parts of our own story so that we don't get stuck. Now you have to understand, not have to, but you can understand that when you're attached to the negative parts of your story, you trigger stress chemicals all the time. And it has an effect on your health. And it has an effect on your health that you don't even recognize, because when the schema are so embedded in your brain as normal, you don't even recognize what it's doing to you. And so that is why when we teach forgiveness, we can get pretty dramatic reductions in stress, reductions in depression, reductions in anger. Because not only does this one wound mitigate, but some of the associations go away. Poor me. Life wasn't fair. It's not okay to take risks. All the associations that we link with this event, they can go vapor. And when you do, you experience that as a kind of freedom in your mind and your body. And so I have taken this literally life-altering event, and it was, I was young enough that I wasn't prepared for the fact that one of the handful of people I depended on most in the world could abandon me. I had no defenses for that. So I was shattered by it. I rebuilt whatever I needed to rebuild. I had a wonderful partner, but I rebuilt. And now it's nothing. It's air. But it's still part of my story. What I go around and teach is that we can all do this. And the place where I'll end is the most important place to do this is not with solitary bad experiences, but the stories that you have about people you're still in relationship with that you love, where the stories are contaminating the relationship or your capacity to love. So if you have a wife or a husband or a mother or a kid, that's where you want to practice forgiveness more than anything else. Current relationships that matter, so that you can free this up to love them, rather than holding back so much because of the story. That's where I have now found forgiveness to be the most important. Again, the world ran to me because of, like, what do you do in terrible big events? And where I am now is, this is the kind of practice which should be brought into every home, so that, you know, families and partnerships and stuff can stay together if it's merited, because they're no longer stuck in the worst part of the relationship or the ongoing pain from 2 years ago or 5 years ago or 7 years ago. Anyway, thank you very much.